Hello and welcome to the channel. As always, like the video, and if you enjoyed the story, leave a comment on if you would want more. This fanfiction was not created by me, but in the description there is a link to the fanfic so you can show your support to the creator and read along. Without any more delay, let's dive into the story.
Akatani joined Uraraka and a bashful Ida back in the observation room, as Bakugo was carted off to the infirmary to get treated by Recovery Girl. After receiving praises from Kaminari and the more vocal students, All Might made a declaration proclaiming Akatani and Uraraka to be the MVPs of the trial. Yaoyorozu explained when given the chance, Akatani-san made use of quite brilliant tactical analysis and on-the-spot thinking when dealing with Bakugo-san, and the latter can be said for Uraraka-san for taking advantage of the explosion and Ida-san's distraction to secure the weapon. All Might agreed, very true, young Yaoyorozu. However, the symbol of peace turned to Akatani. Young Akatani, I must advise you to never spit upon your downed opponents again. It is unbecoming for an up-and-coming hero to display such disrespect, even towards villains. Eyes turned to Akatani, and brows raised. Apparently, it seemed that not everyone had caught the moment where he spat onto Bakugo, if the looks of surprise and disbelief were any indication. Ida, in particular, was affronted enough to open his mouth to rebuke Akatani for his actions, but whatever words he planned to say died in his throat as the temperature of the room suddenly plummeted. Black aura, dangerous and piercing, rose from Akatani's body, punctuated by flashes of green electric bolts. He stared dead straight at All Might, who flinched at the sheer hatred radiating off in the swirling clouds of darkness, the nerve-trembling sight made far worse by Akatani's irises glowing angrily behind his tinted goggles, flames roaring wildly in the pools of jade and emerald. That's funny, you say that when so many heroes are no better than villains themselves. Words chilled to ice struck everyone gathered inside the room. Several shrunk away from the dark being that appeared to possess the purple-haired teen. Holy fuck, man. Kirishima cowered alongside Siro. This darkness. A bird-headed student, Tokoyami Fumikage, shuddered, is unbelievable. Such strong hatred, a heart full of vengeance. The entire room was on edge, the general consensus hovering over whether Akatani was going to explode and attack All Might, never mind that the number one hero could literally turn Akatani into a bloody pulp if needed. No one dared move a muscle, lest they miss the moment where the prospective free-for-all was to begin. But that moment never came. Just as suddenly as it appeared, the deadly aura dissipated like vapor. The temperature in the observation room rose back to normal, and whatever tension that threatened to choke all those who had been watching released its hold and disappeared with Akatani's cloud of hatred. Breaths that had been unwittingly held were let go almost collectively. Akatani stared at All Might a little longer, then wordlessly stepping away from the number one hero and going up to Kaminari. How did I do? The blonde snapped out of his daze, that was so badass, man. You took down Bakugo like he was nothing but a twig. Akatani inwardly smiled, ignoring the wary looks of his classmates. The rest of the battle trials passed with not much fanfare. Compared to the explosive battle between Akatani and Bakugo, the others were significantly less showy. Save for the battle between Team B, Todoroki and Mezu, and Team I, Ojiro and Hagakure, where Todoroki basically told his teammate to evacuate, froze the entire building, and Team I, with his ice, and single-handedly retrieved the weapon. Another moment of notice came when Yaoyorozu quite angrily tossed Mineta out of a window for attempting to grope her, going on to finish the trial by herself. Akatani had no sympathy for the grape-headed pervert, who only survived the fall by using his balls as a cushion. He added another item to his checklist to find a way to get Mineta expelled. Akatani paid close attention when it was Kaminari's turn. As the trial played out, two more items quickly found their way into his mental checklist: teach his friend on how to use his quirk effectively, and train him to not solely rely on his quirk. The trial had ended in a dead heat. Kaminari panicked when forced to fight against Ishido and Aoyama, discharging millions of volts of electricity indiscriminately. His teammate, Jiru, and the opposing team were electrocuted and quickly knocked out, while the electricity fried his brain, leaving Kaminari incapacitated and giggling, completely useless. While the look of absolute stupidity on the blonde was amusing enough for even Akatani to find it slightly funny, it was also deeply concerning. Kaminari would be liability to those around him if all he could do was discharge electricity indiscriminately. Furthermore, any villains that were resistant to electricity would have his hide within seconds. Akatani knew he needed to help Kaminari as soon as possible. Once he returned to his normal self first, that is. He can't really do anything when his friend is a brain-dead, giggling idiot, after all. He'll speak to him after getting fixed up by Recovery Girl. The fated conversation spanned over the next 12 hours or so, beginning when classes ended for the day and the two friends were heading home. It carried on into the night through text messages, and picked up again with the new day after several hours on hold due to sleep. Kaminari, while agreeing that he needed training, became nervous when Akatani started planning everything they needed to cover in order for him to hold his own against enemies. This was the first time the blonde watched his friend go into a deeply analytical mode, possible regimens to hone both his body, agility and quirk, weighing the pros and cons of each, all coming out in almost incoherent muttering. It was intimidating, to say the least. Kaminari just hoped he didn't die from whatever his friend had in store for him. As they neared the campus gate, a barrage of noise ahead stopped them in their tracks. What the fuck? Akatani cussed in disbelief. Dozens of reporters were crowding around the gate, cameras flashing and questions shouted at the beleaguered students trying to get to class without getting mobbed by the chaos around them. What's going on? Kaminari asked. Akatani's ears picked up a question thrown by a reporter. Is it true that All Might is a teacher here? Whatever disbelief Akatani had melted away. Of course this would happen. Kaminari, the blonde turned to him, stick close to me, and don't answer any of their questions. We'll be late otherwise. Oh, okay. Kaminari's answer ended in a squeak as Akatani grabbed his hand and pulled him towards the crowd of reporters. The blonde felt his heart speed up. His friend's hand was rough and calloused against his own, born from prolonged training and hard work. It brought flashbacks of seeing Akatani's sculpted body in the locker room, something that made Kaminari flush all over, as he visualized every detail of muscle he managed to get a peek at the time. Plus, the fact that they were holding hands like a couple made his stomach go all fuzzy, not helping his thundering heart. But at the same time, it was a useful distraction. Kaminari completely ignored the shouting reporters and flashing cameras, too lost in his fantasies about his friend to notice. He only came back to reality when he felt Akatani remove his hand, at which time he noticed they had crossed through the gate. Let's get going. Kaminari barely heard his friend speak to him. I don't wish to have to put up with Aizawa's bullshit if we're late. Alright. Thankfully, they arrived at the classroom before the bell rang. And to everyone's surprise when the bell rang, Aizawa was nowhere to be seen. Ojiro even went up to check behind the teacher's desk, no Aizawa there either. Kaminari tapped a pen against Akatani's shoulder. Hey dude, since Aizawa-sensei's late, does that mean we can give him bullshit to deal with when he shows up? Akatani was really tempted to assent to that notion, had it not been for their homeroom teacher to finally appear in the classroom, looking absolutely done with everything. So nothing unusual then, he inwardly remarked, while whispering to Kaminari. A bit too late for that, think the reporters already did that for us. Aizawa let out one loud sigh, muttering something that Akatani lip-read as fucking nosy reporters, before addressing the class. Alright, for today's homeroom, we'll be choosing the roles of class president and vice president. Moment of silence, before two waves of noise smashed through. The first wave came as whoop of relief that the class was going to do something completely ordinary for homeroom. The second wave, which came immediately after, started with Kirishima quite abruptly standing up, knocking his chair backwards. I'll be the class president. Ashido shot up, knocking her chair backwards. No. I'll be the class president. Chain reaction followed. One by one, many of Akatani's classmates loudly staked their claim to the prestigious role, while he himself stayed silent, refusing to add on to the growing barrage of noise. Pick me. I'm the best choice for class president. No, pick me. Me. Everyone. Stop this nonsense immediately. All eyes turned to Ida. Akatani raised an eyebrow. The role of class president carries great responsibility in representing the class and looking out for fellow classmates. Your classmates will be coming to you for guidance and help. This is not something to take lightly. Ida took a breath. We should uphold our values in democracy and choose our president through a vote. But won't everyone just vote for themselves? Ciro interjected. How do we know who is the most trustworthy? Ajui added. Then we will see who gets the most votes. Ida responded, chopping the air with his hand. Aizawa-sensei, shall we proceed with the ballot? Do whatever you want, just get it done. With that, Aizawa zipped up his sleeping bag and went to sleep. The ballot was done, and the results were in. Several had 0 votes, others had 1 each. All eyes were, however, on the top 2 names. Yaoyorozu Momo, 3 votes. Akatani Mikumo, 2 votes. Akatani blinked. Well then. Yaoyorozu and Akatani, come up to the front, said Aizawa. Both students went up and faced their classmates. The vote has been decided. Yaoyorozu is class president, and Akatani is vice president. Akatani scanned the class, inwardly curious of who voted for him. He caught Uraraka staring off at the wall, drumming her fingers against her desk. His gaze then met with Kaminari, who winked at him. Okay then. Kaminari, may I know what possessed you to vote for me? Lunch hour came. Akatani and Kaminari shared a table near the windows, digging into their afternoon meals. Nothing, man, the blonde replied, mouth half filled with rice. You just have the vibe of a leader. I've never held a position of authority before, Akatani deadpanned. No time but the present to start, am I right? The purple-haired teen had to concede that point to his friend. Good afternoon. Both friends looked up. Yaoyorozu and Jiro stood by their table, trays in hand. May we sit here? Asked the newly elected class president. Go right ahead, Akatani nodded offhandedly. Both girls took the seats next to the 2 friends. I look forward to working with you, Akatani-kun. Yaoyorozu turned to her deputy. Likewise, came the polite response, but other than a glance to make eye contact, no further gesture was given to show an indication that Akatani wanted to continue a possible conversation. This was observed by Jiro, who leaned over to Kaminari. Is he this cold? At the moment, the blonde whispered back conspiratorially, but I've made it my mission to melt that dark and frozen heart of his to get him embrace the light and magic of friendship. You know I can hear you, right? Akatani cut in absolutely deadpan. You speak with as much subtlety as 2 pots bashing against each other. Kaminari laughed, while the 2 girls weren't quite sure how to react to the unfolding scene. Akatani sounded unamused, which didn't explain Kaminari's laughter. Yet Kaminari had the added advantage of knowing how Akatani operated in social situations like this. Yes, Akatani appeared offended, but there was no real bite to his words. But then again, only he was privy to that knowledge, no one else. Luckily, or unluckily, as we will find out later this chapter, a loud alarm halted all activity at Akatani's table, and pretty much the entire cafeteria. A loud, electronic voice rang over the blaring noise. Attention students, an intruder has infiltrated the grounds. This is a level 3 emergency. Please evacuate calmly and quickly. And evacuate quickly did the students do. Unfortunately, calmly they did not. Pandemonium ignited in a blink of an eye. Screams, shouts and wails echo intermingled as the students rushed for the doors all at once. The stampede created a bottleneck as students got into each other's way, pushing and shoving in a mad dash to save themselves from the imminent threat. Back at their table, the 4-1 students tried to figure out what was happening. Is it really an intruder? Kaminari asked over the din. Jiro hurried to the window, looking down towards the front gate. It's just a reporter, she shouted back. We need to get everyone's attention, said Yaoyorozu, before someone gets hurt. Akatani thought fast, and turned back to his classmates. Guys, get off of the floor. Don't ask, just do it. Glancing at one another, the three students quickly stepped up onto the tabletop, or in Jairu's case, a chair. Akatani hurried up to the crowd of frantic students, electricity crackling all over. He then raised a leg, channeling all of the electricity onto the appendage, and brought it down hard. The impact shot the electricity out of his leg and onto the floor. Crackling hard, it burst outwards in all directions, skimming across the floor. His classmates, who were standing on plastic objects, were unaffected. It was another story for the panicking students. The electricity caught everyone by surprise, inducing a mild, but noticeable shock to their systems. All noise was cut off as bodies jerked and shook out of control from the low-powered electrocution. Taking an advantage of the temporary reprieve, Akatani bellowed, "Everyone! Calm down!" All eyes were now on the purple-haired teen. "It's just a reporter. Not some villain out for our skins." Akatani continued, "Do not panic, just evacuate calmly." In the end, evacuation was needless, as another announcement came over the intercom. "Intruder neutralized, Level 3 emergency lifted. All students may return to previous activities, thank you." Akatani turned to the staring students, "You heard it. Carry on." With that, he turned on his heel and returned to the table, his classmates climbing down back to their seats. He sat back down on his chair, stared at his food, and turned to his classmates in a beat. "None of you stepped into the food, I hope." With the fiasco over and done with, life carried on once the lunch hour ended. The four students returned to class amidst stares and whispers, namely at Akatani, who merely took the attention as inconsequential as he returned to his seat. He couldn't, however, avoid the attention from his classmates. "Hey Akatani!" Siro chivied into his space, "That was really cool, what you did back in the cafeteria." "Yeah man." Kirishima jumped in, "You got everyone's attention just like that. You're a natural leader bro. So manly." "I was only doing what could be done," Akatani replied stoically, "there's nothing to it." "It was a little painful though, Karo," Azui croaked at the side. "Actually, there's something I need to say, Akatani-san." All eyes turned to Yaoyorozu as she approached the purple-haired teen. "The way you handled the stampede is nothing short of admirable," the class president said, "as was your ability to take charge of the situation at a moment's notice. I feel that it's only right that you take on the position of class president, instead of just being the deputy." Silence reigned for a moment. Akatani responded, "I would have to respectfully decline, Yaoyorozu-san." "Eh? Why?" Kaminari echoed the confused noise those watching made, "Not to insult class pres and all, but isn't what she said true? We mustn't forget that Yaoyorozu-san has not yet gotten a chance to show that she is worthy of holding such a position," Akatani pointed out, "which was also a reason why I voted for her in the first place." He turned to face the raven-haired girl, "We have only made each other's acquaintance not too long ago, but already I know that you are more than capable of leading this class. Furthermore, we need more female leaders in such a patriarchal society. That's why I believe you should hold on to the position, Yaoyorozu-san, and be our leader through the year. I promise, on my part, to do my best to assist you as your deputy." Silence followed for a brief moment, broken by Kaminari whooping. "Preach man! Give it up for Yamamo!" This started a wave of applause and cheers for the class president, who blushed modestly at the attention, before composing herself. "Very well, I promise to do my best as class president." The noise in the classroom went up by one notch, only to come crashing down with one grating voice. "Shut the fuck up, you loudmouth extras." All eyes turned to Bakugo, who blared back in irritation, feet kicked up on his desk. A moment passed, before the tension was sliced through with the verbal knife. "This is coming from the guy who was nothing but hot air and noise," Akatani drawled. "I don't think you have room to open your shitbag of a mouth." Moment of silence. "Need some of Todoroki's ice for that burn, Bakugo?" Kaminari snorted. Chain reaction of laughter followed, continuing even when Bakugo lunged for the still nonchalant Akatani. I will fucking kill you, you goddamn motherfuck dash. And just like that, the explosions bursting on the blonde's palms abruptly died. Akatani backhanded Bakugo to the floor, as attention from the rest of the class quickly shifted towards Aizawa, quirk activated with a no-nonsense look. All of you, to your seats, now. It took only a second for those out of their chairs to rush back. Bakugo took slightly longer, pulling himself off of the floor and stomping back to his seat, growling at Akatani's dismissive gaze. The purple-haired teen was tempted to give the middle finger in response, but he didn't want to earn a detention because of Bakugo. For today's lesson, things will be a little different, Aizawa began. We will be heading outside of campus to the Unforeseen Simulation Joint Facility, or USJ for short. The facility simulates every known disaster or accident, natural or man-made. Today, you will be doing rescue training to learn how to respond to such events. Hissing sound. The same slots that appeared with their hero costumes during All Might's lesson opened. You're allowed to wear your costumes for today's lesson. Just be at the car park in 15 minutes. Get moving. And move, the class did. The first few minutes of the journey passed by innocuously enough. Conversations flew from one end to the other while Aizawa took the wheel. Akatani zoned out almost immediately while Kaminari, who sat next to him on his right, leaned over to talk with Shiro about something he couldn't be bothered to find out. He was just slipping into a quick nap when a finger prodded his arm. Akatani glanced to his left, the seat taken by one Azui Tsuyu. Yes? Your quirk is rather interesting, Akatani-chan, Azui remarked right out of the blue. So you say, Azui-san. Call me Tsuyu, Karo. Akatani raised an eyebrow. That was unexpected. Very well, Tsuyu-san. Anything else? Azui tapped her finger against her chin. You are rather cold and aloof, Akatani-chan. If I didn't know any better, I'd think your quirk was ice like Todoroki-chan's, not electricity. Inwardly, Akatani groaned. Azui had joined the long list of people who made a comment about his cold aloofness. Yes, he understood that it wasn't beneficial for maintaining positive social relations, but just because he was the protagonist of this story didn't mean that he was going to spill his tragic backstory to just anyone when asked. Hell, not even Kaminari, the only person he had allowed himself to grow close to, knew his entire history. Kirishima, bless his pure soul, chose at this point to cut in, relieving Akatani of the need to quite possibly lose his cool on Azui. It doesn't matter if it's ice or electricity, aka bro's got a really flashy quirk. Akatani glanced at the redhead, who looked wistful for some reason. Enough for him to ignore the fact that his name was butchered without his permission. On the other hand, though my quirk, hardening, is pretty cool, there's nothing flashy about it. I can't see myself becoming popular with the people. Akatani took issue with that statement. What are you saying, Kirishima? Your quirk is extremely useful for hero work. Yeah, but you, Todoroki and Bakugo have flashiness and ought to go with your strength. Double the advantage, man. You three are definitely going to go far in the polls. Okay, Akatani really took offense to that statement. Especially with being paired with that explosive bastard. First of all, he leaned forward, goggles glinting severely enough to unnerve Kirishima. The flashiness of your quirk can easily be a bad thing, nothing more than a liability. What you see on TV is glamorized bullshit. How do you think the public would feel about you if when trying to apprehend a villain, you cause so much collateral damage that innocent bystanders are needlessly murdered? Kirishima flinched, not expecting the rather scathing perspective. Azui added, frankly, I don't see Todoroki-chan or Bakugo becoming that popular with the masses either, Karo. Todoroki-chan is even colder than Akatani-chan, and Bakugo is far too explosive, vulgar and angry to ever be liked by decent people. What the fuck did you say, frog bitch, said Blonde roared several rows behind them. You're not helping yourself here, Bakuho, Kaminari smirked, especially with your personality that just smells of rotten dog feces fermented by the heat of a clogged sewer. I will fucking end your smug arse, goddamned Pikachu. Everyone, shut the hell up. Aizawa's voice came from the front, silencing all noise in an instant, or else detention for the next person who makes a ruckus. That got everyone to zip their lips shut. As the bus continued on its way down the road, Akatani sighed in relief. Finally, some peace. Maybe he could snag that quick nap before they arrive. 15 minutes later, the bus came to a stop at the entrance of USJ. The doors opened with a hiss, allowing the passengers to disembark noisily. The noise turned to awe as the students took in the sight in front of them. It was a huge glass-domed building several stories high, the sunlight glistening off the spotless panes brightly. By the large blue entrance gate, stood a figure dressed in what looked like a spacesuit. Akatani immediately recognized them. It was 13, the space hero and expert in rescue situations. "Good afternoon everyone," the space hero greeted the class warmly. "I'm the space hero, 13, and welcome to the USJ facility for today's lesson on how to respond to disasters and rescue operations. Follow me, please." The students trooped in behind the space hero into the facility, and were met with an incredibly impressive sight within. To call the interior massive wouldn't do the facility any justice whatsoever. Akatani noticed two smaller domes, one red and the other blue, two realistic-looking mountainous areas, one with the remains of buildings and the other a rocky terrain with cliffs, a zone with more buildings in various states of ruin, and a man-made lake with a waterslide and a boat in it. All this under one roof. UA was certainly pulling all the stops here. Wow! It's like Universal Studios Japan. Kaminari exclaimed in awe. Akatani had to agree with him on that. USJ is equipped to simulate all types of disasters. Here, we have a conflagration zone, a downpour zone, flood zone, ruins zone, mountain zone, and landslide zone. Everything is built to scale and realistic accuracy, 13 explained. As his classmates took in their surroundings with various degrees of awe, or none of it, for some, Akatani noticed Aizawa approach the space hero, speaking in hushed tones. He wasn't able to pick up most of what the teachers were saying, but he did catch All Might, absence, and 13 raising 3 fingers. Connecting the dots, Akatani concluded that All Might was supposed to be part of today's lesson, but had reached his time limit and was unable to make it. He knew what that meant. He hadn't forgotten that fateful moment on that skyscraper rooftop. And might as well, Akatani wasn't sure if he could trust himself to be around that smiling symbol of peace without losing his shit. Anyway, 13 got everyone's attention again. Before we proceed with today's lesson, there is something you all need to be aware about. Everyone was all ears. Quirks are powerful things, and if used wrongly, can cause untold damage and destruction. For example, my quirk, Black Hole, allows me to suck in and destroy any matter that has an atomic structure. While I solely dedicate my quirk to rescue work, you can see how easily it can be used to kill people. Dead silence. I hope that you learn that your quirks are not meant for violence, and you will understand your roles as future heroes is to help others, not fight needlessly. The silence lasted a moment longer, before being destroyed by Ida clapping loudly. Bravo! Well said, 13 Sensei. The space hero bowed modestly as the class applauded and cheered for them. Akatani joined in on the clapping, though his mind was elsewhere. What 13 said made a lot of sense. However, Akatani knew that this important lesson wouldn't register in the minds of certain classmates of his, if a certain explosive blonde glaring off to the side was any indication. Furthermore, despite making sense, 13's words left the ground open for plenty of gray areas to form, questions with no easy answers to, debates with no end in sight. Akatani wondered how these issues were to be tackled. The lights in the dome flickered. Akatani snapped out of his musings, eyes staring at the fountain in the middle of the dome. There was a swirling, black mass hovering near the fountain. It grew bigger and bigger, until it spanned the distance between the flood and landslide zones. Then, from the swirling abyss, outstretched a pale hand, followed by a body, covered in severed hands. Then came more, and more. Akatani's breath hitched. "Is this part of the simulation?" he heard Kirishima ask. No, this was not part of the lesson. 13. Protect the students. Aizawa shouted. They were being invaded by villains. 13. Protect the students. Aizawa shouted. Confusion gave way to guarded horror, as dozens, maybe hundreds, of villains poured out of the swirling dark mass like an advancing army and gathered in the central plaza below them, led by the person covered in severed hands, another who seemed to be made of dark mist and had glowing yellow eyes, plus this hulking monstrosity with an exposed brain with exposed eyes amidst the brain matter. Who are they? Kaminari blanched. Villains, all of them, Akatani replied, tone deadly serious. No way. Ochako gasped. The one covered in severed hands looked around with almost childlike curiosity. That's strange, All Might is not here. That's not right, our information said he would be here today. The villain turned to the students, and Akatani caught a flash of madness in his exposed eye, but maybe he'll come running if we take out his pride and joy. Aizawa jumped down to face the first line of villains, easily taking them out with his quirk and capture weapon. 13, meanwhile, began herding the students towards the doors, when suddenly, the same black mist materializes out of thin air, getting in the way of the exit and trapping them. The same glowing yellow eyes appeared in the mist, startling several of students. Good afternoon, a dark voice echoed around them. I am Kurogiri, and we are the League of Villains. We beseech your forgiveness in interrupting your lesson, but we came here today to rid the land of the symbol of peace, All Might. Kill All Might? Ashido stuttered in horror. The eyes shifted from right to left. Yet for some reason, All Might isn't here. Was there a change of plans? In such a tense scenario, Akatani knew the worst thing to possibly do was to go all Leroy Jenkins and attack Kurogiri. Unfortunately, a certain explosive blonde decided to be the dumbass that he was, and lose his cool, as per usual. You fucking shitrag. Die. Bakugu, no. Akatani's words fell on deaf ears as the blonde, and Kirishima, for some reason, lunged at the mist villain with explosive and rock-hard attacks. As expected, the attacks had no effect on Kurogiri, who merely blinked at the sudden acts of aggression against him. My word, that was unexpected, the villain scoffed. I didn't expect the next generation of heroes to be so brash and aggressive. So eager to fight. Akatani didn't like where Kurogiri was heading here. Well, I have my duty to perform. And I'm sure our lackeys will be thrilled to fight with you lot. The mist expanded, and before anyone could react, it had begun to circle around the students and surge into them. Akatani tried to reach for Kaminari, when the ground below them shifted and seemed to disappear. The last thing Akatani remembered amidst the shouts and screams of his classmates was falling through the swirling mist into darkness. The darkness gave way to light. Akatani felt himself falling through the air, everything spinning. Then came the impact, the splash, and suddenly, water, everywhere. He plummeted through limply, before coming to a stop, suspended several feet below the surface. It took a second for his senses to come back and get him to notice that he was underwater, with limited oxygen in his lungs. Akatani flailed a little in an attempt to right himself and swim to the surface, when suddenly, something shot past, barely missing him by an inch. The afterburst of water sent him spinning in the wake. Pushing himself upright, Akatani turned just in time to see the thing that almost crashed into him, a figure who looked like an anthropomorphic shark, slide to a halt not far away. Akatani knew he was in deep shit. The shark person charged at him again. Only kicking out of the way saved him from those sharp, ferocious teeth that glistened from the light above. Akatani knew he had to fight back, or else he'd be reduced to a cloud of blood and body parts at the jaws of this villain. But his lungs were beginning to strain from the lack of oxygen flow, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could hold his breath. The shark villain making his return not helping matters at all. Someone, help, me. Something shot past his right. It struck the shark villain right in the head with the force of a Shinkansen, propelling him away, deeper into the water and out of sight. Akatani, who by this stage was losing oxygen fast and dark spots beginning to cloud his vision, felt something wrapped tightly around his waist. The world suddenly began to accelerate as he was bodily rushed up to the surface. Water gave way to precious oxygen with a splash. Akatani took deep, desperate breaths, mind still spinning wildly from the sudden change of pressure and intake of oxygen. Half-dazed, he felt whatever had wrapped around him gently place him on a hard, dry surface, before unwrapping and retracting away. There he lay, on his side, masked down, hacking up water that managed to get into his lungs from his near brush with death. As he slowly regained the strength to pick himself up, he heard the water break again, followed by a louder, much harsher thud not too far from his position, and a quiet groan. Akatani realized, as he stood up, he was on a yacht in the middle of the shipwreck zone. With him was a dazed Mineta, and climbing onto the yacht was Azui. "You okay, Akatani-chan?" "I think so," he replied. "Was it you who saved me?" "Yes, Karo," Azui nodded. "You were in trouble." "You have my thanks for that," Akatani nodded, "but clearly, the shark villain isn't the only one we have to worry about." Both students turned to the water. Heads began popping up, one by one, around the yacht. More villains, including the shark one who nearly did Akatani in. "Hee, fresh meat," one that resembled a crocodile cackled. "Easy bait," another cheered. Akatani raised an eyebrow. Dangerous as these villains might be in numbers, they were just low-level thugs, more brawn than brain. Numbers to intimidate, expendable, mere cannon fodder in the overall plan. Speaking of plan, Akatani needed to know what was going on. "You think we're just easy pickings? Clearly your leaders didn't plan this properly." At the villain's confusion, Akatani spread his arms wide. "Look around, water as far as the eye can see, suited for your quirks no doubt. But what your leaders didn't bother to take into consideration." He pulled his arms in, producing crackles of green electricity. The confused villains immediately blanched in horror. "That I have an electric quirk." Akatani inwardly smirked at the terrified villains. "So now, unless you want me to discharge potentially lethal amounts of electricity into the water and electrocute you all into smoldering crisps, you lot better tell me what the hell is going on here. Who is that blue-haired hand-covered son of a bitch, and that giant monstrosity with the beak?" As if we'd tell you, one foolhardy villain tried to put up a defiant front. "Oh well, guess you really don't value your pitiful lives then," Akatani shrugged, the crackling electricity growing stronger. Wait! We'll tell," a villain with a piranha head intervened. Akatani willed the electricity away, and lowered his arms. "Start talking, then." "The handman's Shigaraki Tamura. He came with this thing called a Numu to kill All Might." "And what is this Numu?" asked Akatani. "We don't know. Just some genetically engineered being made to match All Might. That's all we were told by Shigaraki," another villain added quickly. Akatani pondered what was said. A genetically engineered being? And it has the capability to take on All Might and possibly kill him? This was something worth seeing for himself. All Might was the #1 hero, but even he isn't invincible if his memory as Midoriya on the skyscraper rooftop served him well. By implication though, this Numu thing wasn't invincible either. But that later, now he had to deal with these useless underlings. "Your willingness to talk might have just saved your lives, I'll give you that." Akatani could almost see the relief wash over the villains' faces, thinking that they were spared from the pain of electricity. How wrong they were. "Oh, by the way," Akatani said, catching the villain's attention, "I lied." Before anyone could fully compute what he just said, let alone attempt to swim away, he shot his arm out. Electricity crackled, and blasted from his outstretched hand into the water. The screams of the villains echoed around the dome. They jerked, flailed, and danced about like stringed puppets as the electricity traveled through the water, electrocuting them and disrupting all basic function in their systems. Azui watched in silent horror as smoke began to rise from the charring bodies, eyes losing the life within them. She quickly rushed to her classmate, grabbing his upper arm. "Please, Akatani-chan. Stop this. This is too much." On cue, the electricity dissipated, and the purple-haired teen retracted his hand. "Only because you said so, Tsuyu-san." She turned to the villains with stricken eyes. The villains were floating face up or down, motionless on the water's surface, smoldering and somewhat charred. Some were groaning quietly, others were silent. Several twitched involuntarily from the residual electricity still rattling their nerves. Azui couldn't believe the brutality committed before her. "Suyu-san, we need to go." She quickly realized that Akatani had pulled away from her grasp. He was by the still-dazed Mineta, dragging him by the ankle. His hand was outstretched. She felt justifiably reluctant to take his hand, seeing how he callously electrocuted those villains not mere moments prior. "I only hurt those who deserve it," said Akatani, as if reading her thoughts. "You are far from worthy of such a fate, Suyu-san. And besides, I only knocked the villains out, they aren't dead." It took another moment, but Azui eventually relented. She went forth and took her classmate's outstretched hand. "Hold on tight." There was a flash of light, and a crack like lightning. Akatani took off from the deck of yacht, Azui in one hand, Mineta by the ankle in the other, leaving behind the lifeless bodies of the villains who stood no chance against the power of electricity. Coming to a landing at the edge of the man-made lake, Akatani tossed Mineta to the ground and gently released his hand from Azui's. "What now, Akatani-chan?" The purple-haired teen scanned the scene before them. Up ahead was the central plaza, where the villains had first come through Kurogiri's portal. Aizawa was still battling the low-level thugs by the fountain. Their teacher, despite the multitudes of villains all coming for him, appeared to be holding his own. That is, until he noticed Shigaraki lunge for Aizawa. His eyes went wide behind his goggles. The hand-covered villain grabbed the underground hero's elbow. Just like that, the fabric of his hero suit peeled away and disintegrated before Akatani's eyes. Aizawa's skin was just beginning to peel away too when he managed to pull himself from Shigaraki's grip. Handyman's got a disintegration quirk. Requires all 5 fingers to be in contact before activation, Akatani thought to himself. Any further analysis of Shigaraki's quirk had to be put on hold when, apparently on the hand-covered villain's command, the Numu pummeled Aizawa to the ground, the sound of bones breaking audible to Akatani's ears. The Numu peeled Aizawa off the ground by the hair, and slammed him back down again. Akatani's eyes narrowed. Not on his watch. "Suyu-san, stay with Mineta. Hide yourselves, and get ready." "Akatani-chan, you can't be serious." "I am dead serious, Suyu-san. I have officially lost my shite on this." Before Azui could stop him, Akatani hurtled towards the central plaza, electricity crackling madly around him. Aizawa groaned in agony. Pain threatened to cloud his consciousness. His elbow was damaged by Shigaraki's quirk, his other arm broken by the Numu. And there was so much blood everywhere, staining his face and the ground in puddles. More of the crimson liquid flowed, as the Numu continued to pound him into the forming crater beneath him. Shigaraki was laughing like a child, an insane one for that matter. "You can feel it, can you, Eraserhead? This is the power that matches your precious symbol of peace. How does it feel, to be the test dummy for the weapon that will, once for all, kill All Might?" Aizawa gritted against the pain. He wouldn't deign to give this villain a reply. Especially not when the Numu was raising him up to slam him back down again. Then, there was a loud crack. 1A's homeroom teacher heard Shigaraki yelp, and the Numu let out an inhuman screech. The Numu released its grip on him, letting him fall towards the ground like an apple falling from a tree. He then felt a pair of arms wrap around him, another loud crack, followed by the sensation of being airborne. The weightless feeling didn't last long. Aizawa felt the thud of boots hitting the ground, and a familiar voice reach his ears. "Good, I see you've decided to rejoin the world of the living and become useful for once, Mineta. Suyu-san, I need you and Mineta to take Aizawa-sensei someplace safe. I don't know if anyone has managed to escape yet to call the staff." Aizawa heard Azui reply, "There's nothing stopping you from doing this, Karo?" "You got that right, Suyu-san. Now go." Before Aizawa could stop him, there was a third crack, and Akatani was gone. The underground hero barely heard Azui tell him that they were about to move. His head was spinning from the brutal attack and suddenly being saved by the vice president of his class. As he slipped into unconsciousness, Aizawa resolved to have a few words with Akatani as soon as this debacle had ended. Meanwhile, Shigaraki and the Numu had recovered from the sudden electrical attack. Where's Eraserhead? Where did he go? Crack. Oh, someplace safer. Away from low-life bastards like you. Shigaraki's eyes widened as Akatani appeared before him. Who are you? It's for me to know, and you to find out, handyman. Shigaraki growled at the insulting nickname. What did you just call me? A handyman, Akatani shrugged indifferently, someone who fixes the plumbing and such. Seriously though, you look like you need a hand at personal hygiene. Ever heard of moisturizer and chapstick? Numu. Kill him. Akatani huffed, leaping into the air just as the hulking monster brought its hand down on the spot where he was standing just a moment prior. Some people are just so thin-skinned, he rolled eyes, flying out of the way of the Numu's other hand as it swung past. Like an annoying fly, Akatani led the Numu in a game of cat and mouse. He would hover at one point, only to fly out of the way of the monstrosity's fists at the last moment. He had to admit, this was fun, not to mention adrenaline pumping. Shigaraki's frustrated shouts like a stage parent to their child was the cherry on top of this cake of action. But like all fun moments, things got dull very quickly. Enough of this game, time to end this, Akatani thought to himself. Just dodging one powerful punch from the Numu, he unleashed a wave of electricity, strong enough to toe the line of lethality at the monster. The wave struck its back with a flash, and the Numu let out a scream, but one not of pain, but annoyance. Akatani's breath hitched. How the? Shigaraki laughed. You think it would be so easy? Numu's skin is impervious to all quirk attacks. Even All Might's famous punches. Akatani dodged a swinging fist, the rush of air almost throwing him off balance. Took out a significant chunk of his core reserves. He needed to conserve his power, and find this monster's weak point before he either drains through his core from defensive attacks, possibly ending in his death from core depletion, or he gets hit and beaten by the Numu, possibly ending in his death by broken bones, ruptured organs and blood loss. Dodging another fist, Akatani willed a blade of electricity to appear. Hopefully this would work. Sliding between the Numu's legs, he swung the blade with frightening speed. This time, like a hot knife to butter, the electricity sliced through the monster's legs, the sound of skin, muscle, and bone severing and blood splashing ringing in his ears. The Numu screamed, falling to the ground. Akatani just barely got out of the way before it crashed with an almighty boom. Taking advantage of the momentary reprieve, he swung his blade again. The monster screamed once more, as its arms were severed from its body amidst more splashes of blood. But while the amputation of the limbs provided a few precious seconds for Akatani to catch his breath and consider his next move, he quickly realized how short those few seconds lasted. For while the Numu was immobile following his skill with the blade, right before his eyes, its limbs began to regrow and regenerate out from the bloody stumps. Akatani heard Shigaraki gloat behind him, but paid the villain no attention. Very well, since making the monster immobile wasn't good enough, he needed to make the immobility permanent. Because for all the Numu's monstrous state, it was still human, or once was a human. That probably meant that it needed a heart, lungs and brain to function properly. Right, so be it then. As the Numu's limbs finished regenerating and it began to pick itself off the ground to continue the fight, Akatani moved in for the final attack. Jumping up into the air to face the monster as equals, Akatani willed more electrical power into the blade, make it bigger and longer. Dodging one massive hand trying to grab him, he flew closer to the Numu's neck. Raising his blade high, with a loud shout, he brought it down with a sweeping swing. Skin tore, muscle snapped, and bones shattered. With a splatter of blood, the head came clean off, hurtling off towards the fountain like a baseball. It landed with both a crash and a splash, the immense weight of the decapitated head destroying the fountain structure and the blood still spurting from the severed arteries staining the water red. The headless body, meanwhile, had begun to fall backwards. Still airborne, Akatani dove down onto the monster's chest, right over where the heart was located. Raising the blood-stained electrical blade once more, he brought it straight down into the heart. More blood spurted, some of it splashing onto Akatani's face. He twisted the blade for good measure to completely destroy the still beating heart. Pulling the blade out of the flesh, he leapt off the Numu's body, just as it crashed to the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust that blanketed the plaza. As the dust hovered, Akatani landed, dispersing the blade back into his core. He waited for the dust to settle, and for Shigaraki to come into view. Coughing and spluttering, the hand-covered villain was greeted with an impossible sight. The Numu, carefully engineered to match all might and strength and power, was on the ground, motionless, its head severed at the neck, lying forgotten at the ruined fountain, and blood pouring freely from the stab wound to the heart. There was no more life. It was dead. Taken down not by All Might, the boss of the final dungeon, but this unknown NPC who shouldn't have that much power. NPCs are just meant to be sitting ducks, not getting in the player's way. But this person just ruined everything. Shigaraki let out a strangled cry. This wasn't supposed to happen. Their greatest weapon to kill the symbol of peace, cut down by this insignificant brat. Fury soared through his veins. He just wanted to grab this brat's neck and disintegrate it, so he can kill that gloating, nonchalant look off of his face. Oh yes, give that fucking lowly NPC will die a slow, agonizing death for getting in the way and messing everything up. But he saw that blade of electricity, and knew that he'll be cut to pieces should he try. Can this get any worse? Apparently, it can. Portals swirled into existence. Kurogiri stepped out. Shigaraki. What? We have to retreat. One of the students managed to escape. Reinforcements will definitely be on their way at this rate. Even with the severed hand covering his face, Akatani swore veins would be popping up all over the villain's forehead. No, this can't end like this, Shigaraki murmured with barely held back rage. We were supposed to kill All Might, but he never bothered to show his smiling face and face us. Then our Numu gets killed by this. Akatani merely raised an eyebrow as hand villain's ire was turned on him. This NPC. Who should have been killed where you were teleported away? Well, clearly you didn't do your research, Akatani drawled, raising a hand that was crackling with electricity. You shouldn't have sent a person with an electric quirk to a body of water. I think your lackeys can attest to that, provided they're still alive, that is. Shigaraki growled, you ruined everything. If All Might doesn't dare show his face, we'll take his pride by killing you instead. Kurogiri tried to stop him, but Shigaraki was too consumed by rage to be stopped. The hand villain lunged for Akatani, hand outstretched and aimed for his face. Akatani would have yawned as if bored out his mind if it weren't for the fact his life was in danger. So he acted as he would usually do. Releasing a jolt of electricity that momentarily distracted Shigaraki, he ducked low, keeping one fist raised to deliver a powerful blow that he swore made the villain's jaw crack. It also knocked the disembodied hand on his face clear off, sending it flying through the air like the Numu's head previously and landing some distance away. As Shigaraki reeled in the pain left by the blow, Akatani swung a leg out and struck the villain at the back, sending him toppling face-first to the ground. Akatani was on him in seconds, his hands pressing Shigaraki's head into the ground and anchoring the villain's hands with his boots. Kurogiri meanwhile tried to create a portal to save his comrade. He didn't get much far when explosions rocked the plaza, and something collided head-on with him, sending him sprawling to the ground. He tried to get back up, only for whoever it was who crashed into him to hold him down and their hand to land heavily on his metal neckpiece. Gotcha now, Mistface, but Kogo smiled dangerously, one move from you, and I'll blow your neck armor and body sky high. If Akatani had been paying attention to that little scene off to the side, it would be one of the extremely rare moments where he might consider thanking the explosive blonde for keeping Kurogiri off his back. But he hadn't, so that thought never crossed his mind. Instead, he focused on dealing with the struggling Shigaraki beneath him. The villain needed his hands for his quirk to work. So why not punish him for the entire debacle on that? Akatani stepped harder on Shigaraki's hands, applying more pressure as the muffled screams grew louder. Bones creaked and cracked, before the very definitive sound of said bones fracturing punctuated the screams of agony. He would have put in more pressure until the fractured bones had been ground to powder, had he not been momentarily distracted by the sounds of the front door blowing inwards and a familiar trademark catchphrase echo across the dome. "Have no fear. Everything is all right, for I am here." The star of the hour and original target of this debacle, All Might, has finally made his appearance, Akatani thought sardonically, moments before he was pushed off by Shigaraki. Rolling and picking himself up in one fell swoop, Akatani heard another brief scuffle. This time Bakugo was thrown off of Kurogiri and teleported to the other side of Plaza. Must have also been distracted, just like me, he thought to himself, how careless of me. Akatani turned to Shigaraki, who looked absolutely gleeful at the symbol of peace finally coming to fight them as originally planned. The inside of his stomach curdled. God, he really does need that moisturizer and chapstick. Though whatever glee Shigaraki had quickly died when Kurogiri appeared behind him via portal and laid a misty hand on the younger's shoulder. "We can't fight him. Our Numu is dead. We'll be wiped out instantly." Akatani could see the myriad of emotions flashing across Shigaraki's face. He looked so desperate, like a child in want of a toy. But such want melted away into frustrated resignation. "Fine, let's go." Shigaraki took a step, then started. "Wait." Akatani observed the villain feel his face, noticing one finger from each hand lifted upwards away from contact. "Father, where is father?" Akatani raised an eyebrow. Handyman called the hand that was previously attached to his face father? Something must be really messed up in his brain to give names to inanimate objects. Unless, if the horrifying thought that had just flashed into his mind was correct. He turned to the disembodied hand, lying innocently several paces away. His stomach curdled again. Ignoring Shigaraki's frantic cries, Akatani stepped over to the hand and picked it up. It was cold to the touch, and the skin was pale, almost snow-white. The flesh was firm and the skin elastic. It was flexible too, the fingers moved easily at the joints, as if the appendage had been severed off from a newly deceased corpse. Instinctually though, Akatani knew that the hand was not fresh. But still, it must have been soaking in some preservation solution like formaldehyde for ages, since not even the slightest bit of rot or decay marred the flawless skin. "You know what?" Despite the uncomfortable churning of his stomach, Akatani figured it would be nice to have a keepsake from this debacle. Plus, judging from how mental Shigaraki was becoming, the hand might be a good send-off for the insane villain. He turned back to the scene, disembodied hand in hand. Shigaraki, as expected, had a look of pure madness, scrabbling about like a wild animal looking for his father's hand. Kurogiri, meanwhile, was trying to pull the frantic villain towards the portal he'd made. To Akatani's left, he could see All Might running down the stairs towards the plaza. He had to do this quickly. "Oi! Handy man!" All eyes turned to Akatani. All Might came to a stop. "Looking for this?" He held the disembodied hand into view. Like a firework going off, Shigaraki exploded. "Give it back! Give it back to me! How dare you treat father like this? Give it back!" Akatani pretended to think about it. "I think not. It would be an interesting keepsake from this shitshow. And besides, if this is your father's real hand, then..." Those present watched as Akatani folded the fingers of the disembodied hand into the palm, save for the middle finger, which he adjusted straight up. Once done, he turned the offensive gesture towards Shigaraki, flicking up his own bird as he smirked. "I think this represents how disappointed he would be to see his son become such a disgusting villain." Shigaraki's eyes bulged with apoplectic rage, his struggles growing wilder. "How dare you! How could you defile father like that? Give him back. Give him back. Akatani couldn't resist the smirk that formed behind his mask. Kurogiri was now manhandling a screaming Shigaraki towards the portal. Without so much as a glance on anyone, the mist villain stepped through, taking the hand villain with him. The piercing wails dissipated with the portal, fading away into nothing. Silence reigned for several long moments. No one watching quite knew what to do next. Akatani lowered his raised middle finger, content that this shitshow had finally come to an end. Young Akatani. He turned towards All Might, eyebrow raised. What kept you? He asked questioningly. All Might couldn't ignore the disembodied hand giving him the middle finger pointed directly at him. Shortly after, the rest of UA's staff show up, led by Ida, who Akatani found to be one to manage to get past Kurogiri and make his escape back to the campus to call for backup. Backup that was ultimately needless, since Shigaraki and Kurogiri had already made their escape, leaving behind a USJ in a mess, and one decapitated pneumocorpse. Damage control and recovery was implemented almost immediately. The police and paramedics had been dispatched, and the staff gathered together the rest of Class 1A to check them over for any injuries that needed immediate medical attention. Thankfully, besides 13, who had the unfortunate business of getting part of their back destroyed by their own quirk when Kurogiri had used a portal against them, and Aizawa, no one suffered any major injuries aside from a few cuts and scrapes. Kaminari was an exception, having short-circuited his brain discharging his electricity all in one go to defeat the villains in the mountain zone, where he, Yayorozu and Jairu were teleported to. As Akatani watched his friend stumble about stupidly giving two thumbs up, face twisted in a goofy grin and a bit of blood dribbling from his nose, he reinforced his plan to train up Kaminari to prevent yet another situation where his friend could quickly become a liability for uncontrolled use of his quirk. Akatani heard the sirens wailing. Time to move, he thought to himself, as he was herded out with the rest of his classmates by the staff. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the city, in what appeared to be a regular well-stocked pub, a portal opened. The once quiet room was filled with screams and wails as Kurogiri stumbled through, still manhandling Shigaraki. Only when the portal close behind them, did the hand villain finally break out of Kurogiri's grip, crumpling to the floor in a heap. To the side, was a flat-screen monitor, currently powered off. But not for much longer. The screen flickered to life, and for a moment, all one could see was static. Then, the image cleared into a silhouette of a man, who spoke in a deep, gravelly voice. Tamura, Kurogiri, how did it go? And what happened to the Numu? The mist villain, walking to the back of bar counter, replied resignedly, dead. Dead, the silhouette repeated, as if not quite believing Kurogiri, by All Might? No. Kurogiri fidgeted with a glass, by one of the students. While the silhouette started at this unexpected information, Shigaraki was going berserk. He threw furniture, disintegrated them and other things around the bar, screaming and fuming in uncontrollable rage. He didn't care that his hands were fractured, his anger overriding any pain he might have felt. I'll destroy his fucking face and tear apart his body. I'll kill him for taking father and mocking him. I'll kill him. I'll kill him. Tamura, calm yourself this instant, the silhouette ordered with no room for refusal. The hand villain finally stopped destroying the bar, but one could still feel the raw anger radiating off him. Tell me everything, Tamura, from the very beginning. Barely holding his flaming temper in, Shigaraki recounted everything, from how All Might was not with the class as predicted, to Kurogiri scattering the students all over USJ. But as he got to the part where Akatani became involved, his already thinning control over his anger began to fray even more. And that fucking NPC, Sensei, with zero importance, just flies up and decapitates our Numu with his electricity. It's impossible. Electricity can't do that. He must have cheated, somehow. He just took it down like a low-level boss. Shigaraki began to tremble. Then, he stole father from me. And broke my hands. All with that smug look on his face. He thinks he's so good, that he's the MVP, but he's not. He's just a cheating NPC. NPCs aren't supposed to have such power. It's just. He let out a frustrated scream, disintegrating the bar top, much to Kurogiri's chagrin. Sensei looked thoughtful. So unfair. What gives that fucker the right to upstage everything? Nothing. Nothing. He deserves to die. And I will kill him. Tamura, calm yourself. Halting another disintegrating rampage, Sensei addressed Shigaraki, come to my room, Tamura, and show me your hands. I also have something to tell you. With that, the screen flickered out. Shigaraki slowly pulled away from the bar, and went through a door off to the side without a further word. Kurogiri sighed, returning to the glass he had been cleaning. Hopefully, he could get a short while of peace without Shigaraki destroying his bar. Back at USJ, the cleanup, recovery and damage control were still ongoing. With the students accounted for, Principal Nizu and hero teachers Midnight and Snipe went inside to survey the damage. The police split their duties between questioning the students, removing the decapitated Numu corpse for study in their forensics department, and rounding up the remaining villains who still lingered in the facility. Paramedics had loaded Aizawa and 13 into a waiting ambulance, speeding off with sirens wailing towards the main campus for immediate treatment. Other ambulances were likewise loaded with villains in need of medical treatment themselves. Akatani, as with his classmates, found himself being questioned. But since he was at the forefront of the confrontation with Shigaraki and the Numu, lead investigator Detective Tsukachi Naomasa took his statement. Tsukachi then told Akatani, once he had finished, to hand over the disembodied hand that he stole from Shigaraki as evidence. While disappointed that his keepsake was taken away, Akatani took slight pleasure in observing the discomfort that flashed over the detective's face, since the hand was still folded into the offensive bird gesture. After passing the hand to another police officer, Tsukachi spotted Principal Nizu and the two teachers exiting the facility. Excusing himself, the detective went up to speak to Nizu. Akatani took this dismissal and returned to where his classmates were gathered. He spotted Yaoyorozu and Jiru standing together, and went up to them. Hey, are you both okay? Oh, Akatani-san, Yaoyorozu turned to him, yes, we're both fine. Just a couple of scrapes. Did the villains give you two any trouble? At first, Jiru replied, but Kaminari incapacitated them with his quirk. I was able to cover the both of us with an insulating shield to protect against the electricity, Yaoyorozu added. I see, Akatani nodded, my guess is that Kaminari's brain is still fried? Jiru pointed with her thumb over to the stumbling blonde, goofy grin still in place, eyes unfocused and glassy. Both thumbs were up, and he was making weird, unintelligible noises that Uraraka and Azui seemed to find funny. Akatani sighed, training it is then. Excuse me, Akatani-kun? He turned around. Principal Nizu had come up to him, hands, paws, clasped behind his back. Principal Nizu, is something the matter? Asked Akatani. Nothing big, the bear, or mouse. Or dog, figure smiled amicably, I heard from Detective Tsukachi about what you did. Really brave of you, actually, to take on that Numu and come away with barely a scratch. I did what I had to do, Akatani shrugged, it's either it dies, or we all die. Very true, Nizu nodded, still, there are many factors of today that require a second look. In fact, I would very much like it if we could have a private chat in my office afterwards. Akatani steeled his reaction. You're not in trouble, I assure you, Akatani-kun, said Nizu, there are things we need to discuss with regards to what you had to do, and how you did it. For greater understanding and clarity, in simple terms, for the both of us. Said student released a breath. That was certainly more palatable. All right, Principal Nizu. Final check of Class 1A's students was carried out, before they were dismissed and allowed to return to campus. Kaminari eventually returned to the world of functionality just as the class were packing up. Noticing that Akatani was not amongst them, he had asked Yaoyorozu if she knew where his friend was. Being told that Akatani was in a meeting with Principal Nizu, Kaminari staked outside the principal's office while everyone else left. Hours passed, but the blonde stayed put, sitting down when his legs grew tired from standing. Even nightfall did nothing to sway Kaminari, apart from pulling out his phone to make a call to his mom to let her know he'll be late coming home, and to play games until his friend emerged. Just as he was tackling the latest match-it puzzle, Kaminari heard incomprehensible voices, followed by the door opening. "I shouldn't keep you any longer, Akatani-kun," came Principal Nizu's voice. "I'm sure your parents are worried." "It's fine, Principal Nizu," that was his friend speaking. "I'm glad that we had this talk." "It's my pleasure. You should get going though, you don't want to keep your friend waiting for any longer." It was only then did Akatani peek out the door, noticing Kaminari waiting expectantly for him. "Kaminari? What are you doing here? Shouldn't you have gone home first?" "No way, man," the blonde mock gasped. "I could never leave you to go home by yourself. Plus, it's super lonely. A bro should never leave his bro all alone." Akatani's cold, dead heart fluttered a little. "You have an extremely loyal friend there, Akatani-kun," Nizu remarked. "Treasure him deeply, you don't often find such strong friendships nowadays." "I know, I'll remember that. Well then, I shan't keep you any longer. Have a safe trip home you too." "Thanks, Principal Nizu," both students chorused at the same time. With parting bows of farewell, the two students took their leave. They stayed in companionable silence as they left the campus, entering the lit streets of the still bustling city. As they approached UA Station, Akatani broke the silence. "Kaminari, we don't have school tomorrow, right?" "Yeah, we were given the day off to recover from what happened at USJ," the blonde nodded. "What about it? Do you have any plans?" Akatani asked. "No, why?" "Yayarozu-san told me what happened earlier at USJ, how you discharged electricity indiscriminately to take out the villains. While effective in that situation, you can't expect all kinds of villains to be susceptible to such a random attack." "Yeah." Kaminari scratched his cheek. "You mentioned this before. Also, it is dangerous to just be reliant on your quirk. If there is a villain who is resistant or immune to electrical attacks, you will be taken down before you know it. You need to be able to attack physically to give yourself an edge. If not, you're likely to become a liability to other heroes, or unable to hold yourself if alone." Kaminari's hand trailed down to his heart. "You're really blunt, aren't you?" "I don't sugarcoat things, as Aizawa-sensei would do," Akatani shrugged, going off topic for a moment. "Despite the rather unethical motivational method he decided to pull off on our first day at UA, Aizawa-sensei was right to say that the world of heroics is a dangerous one. Just look at what happened earlier today. Furthermore, you've got to give the man some respect for putting his life on the line to protect us." Akatani gave his friend a pointed look, because trust me, getting your elbow partially disintegrated and your body shattered by a genetically engineered monster is not fun. Period. Kaminari nodded, swallowing at the mental image. "That's why being able to hold out by yourself and getting the upper edge is important," Akatani said, "and since you don't have any plans tomorrow, meet me at Dagoba Municipal Beach tomorrow at sunrise. I need to start training you." "Tea training?" "Yes, training," Akatani looked at Kaminari dead in the eyes, "to keep yourself and others alive. To save others is the ultimate goal of a hero. But staying alive to save others is on the same plane as that. I'm doing this for the both of us, so that not only will you become a great hero someday, I can sleep a little better knowing the person I care about is able to hold his own in battle and in crisis." "Kaminari?" The blonde had gone stock still, eyes wide, mouth hanging open slightly. Silent as a grave. Then, the tears came. "Why are you crying?" You care for me." Akatani raised an eyebrow. "Of course I care for you. You're my friend." If anything, his nonchalant response made the tears fall harder. "I can die happy now," Kaminari happy wept, throwing himself onto Akatani. I've managed to thaw your frozen heart. I have fulfilled my life's purpose. Anything is possible now." Akatani said nothing, even when his friend's tears began to stain his uniform. He just chalked it up to Kaminari being Kaminari. Waiting for the blonde to stop crying, Akatani nonchalantly patted his back in a half-hearted attempt to soothe him. Eventually, the tears stopped. The pair separated, Kaminari rubbing his eyes. "So, Dagoba Beach, tomorrow at sunrise," Akatani reiterated. "Absolutely. I'll be ready. Train me until I am sore all over." Kaminari pumped his fist in the air. "I'll take your word for that, for I'm not going easy on you." The first glows of sun slowly pushed away the darkness of the night as the new day began. On Dagoba Beach, a lone figure, wearing nothing but a pair of sweatpants, stood on the pristine, glittering sand, gazing out to the horizon as sunrise approached. Well, he would have done that, if the sight of litter already beginning to accumulate on the would-be pristine sand hadn't drawn his frustration. Vein pulsed in Akatani's forehead. His efforts to clean the beach was starting to become undone by the callous thoughtlessness of others. Gosh, did he want to electrocute those imbeciles for ruining his hard work. Turning a hand towards an empty soda can, Akatani released a beam of electricity. It enveloped the can, before spider-webbing out along the entire length and breadth of the beach, hitting other metallic litter. Raising his hand, Akatani levitated the ensnared litter off the sand, pulling them into a coalesced ball, then sending it over to the nearest trash can. "That's really impressive, Akatani." Dropping the litter into the bin, the purple-haired teen broke the connection as Kaminari, dressed in exercise clothing and holding a water bottle, made his appearance. "You're early," Akatani remarked. "I wasn't expecting you for another half an hour or so." "Couldn't wait, man," Kaminari replied. "I'm too excited for your training." "I'll see how long you retain that sentiment," Akatani thought to himself. "Alright, first things first, warm up. We're going to run along the beach from one end to the other, until I say stop. Yosh! Let's do this." Kaminari certainly wasn't feeling so pumped up some time later, the sun now halfway over the horizon. The blonde's stamina was paltry at best. They hadn't even finished the second lap across the beach and he was already dry heaving for air and stumbling, legs shaking and barely holding him up. Akatani, on the other hand, hadn't even broken into sweat yet, his breathing still regular and normal. "I take everything back," Kaminari wheezed, "this is hell." "You're just not used to it," said Akatani, "we'll have to work on this. But for now, that's enough. Take a 5-minute rest." Kaminari all but collapsed face-first into the sand. Unaffected by his friend's dramatics, he electrokinetically pulled the blonde's water bottle into his hand, placing it by the still groaning teen's head. "Drink up, I don't want you fainting from heatstroke." The blonde took the bottle, pulled his face up from the sand, and gulped down the water greedily like a parched man in a desert stumbling upon an oasis. Once his thirst was quenched, he face-planted back into the sand, unmoving. Akatani sighed, turning away from his friend to stare out towards the horizon. The sun had fully come into view, the last vestiges of night being chased away by the rays of orange and yellow. The ocean shimmered under the sun's light, the waves undulating with sparkling ebbs of brightness. It was a beautiful sight, something Akatani knew Kaminari was missing out because he was still face down on the sand and snoring. Snoring? Akatani turned to his friend. He realized he wasn't hearing things. Kaminari had fallen asleep where he laid. This would not do. Going over to his sleeping friend, Akatani effortlessly picked him up bridal style, all without waking the blonde up. He then stepped over to the water's edge, where the incoming wave barely skimmed his shoes. Waiting for the right moment, Akatani heave-hoed, and threw Kaminari into the sea. The blonde hit the water with a splash, waking up instantly. An incoming wave chose at that same moment to wash over him, soaking him completely. Not expecting to be engulfed by water, Kaminari screamed and flailed about, thinking he was drowning. It took him several moments to realize that he was in several centimeters of water, not lost in the vast depths of the ocean. He further realized that he made a complete fool of himself in front of his friend/slave driver, whose arms were crossed over his bare chest and giving him the most unimpressed look he could describe. Ha ha ha, sorry? The unimpressed stare did not let up. Did you sleep at all last night? Kaminari glanced downwards guiltily. A couple of hours? Akatani sighed, pinching his nose. You're going to maintain an 8-hour sleep schedule every night, or so help me I will break into your home and force you to sleep. Why yes sir. Akatani sighed again, walking over to pull a still dripping wet Kaminari to his feet. Right, now that we've cleared things up, we're going to start with how to defend yourself. I want you to punch me in the face. What? Punch me in the face, Kaminari, Akatani repeated. The flash of horror on the blonde's face was noticeable to anyone. Kaminari, I need you to forget me as your friend for this. Picture me as some villain about to kill you. The only way to save yourself is to sock the living daylights out of me, so do it, Akatani pressed. Kaminari swallowed hard, clenching his hand into a fist. Releasing a breath, he raised his fist. Shutting his eyes, he threw the punch. Progress was ultimately slow that morning, but they did get somewhere. Kaminari, when pressed, was able to throw a decent punch, if the bruise on Akatani's cheek was any indication, along with having to click his jaw back into place. They had then moved towards the beginnings of self-defense, namely how to dodge a punch or blow from the opponent, before throwing a punch yourself. It took many tries, with Akatani holding back his strength in his blows at first. Kaminari was eventually able to dodge while holding himself steady to throw a punch, but not after receiving many a punch to the face himself. By this time, the sun was well up in the sky, and it was starting to get hotter. Alright, that's enough for today. Kaminari was once again on the sand, panting hard, sweating buckets. He was thoroughly knackered. Get up, we're going back to my place for brunch. The blonde shifted. Could you carry me? I can't feel my legs. And my arms are jelly. All was silent for a moment. Fine, but only this once. You're expected to pick yourself up after this. I know, Kaminari mumbled, gazing up to his friend with a tired smile. You're the best. Akatani released a breath. Going over to pick up his friend's bag and sling it across his chest, he went back to the blonde. Crouching down, Akatani took Kaminari's arm, slinging across his shoulders. With a bit of maneuvering, he was able to pick his friend up in a piggyback with no more than a grunt. Everything in order, Akatani trekked away from the beach back up to the road. Walking towards the bus stop, the purple-haired teen felt his friend nuzzle his cheek against the nape of his neck. Unable to stop the soft grin from spreading his lips, Akatani returned the gesture by leaning his head back to nuzzle Kaminari. The grin became slightly wider when the blonde giggled quietly in response. For that exact moment, as they waited for the bus to arrive, Akatani could say that life was good. That coming weekend was divided between Kaminari and Akatani training together at Dagoba Beach, and getting ahead on their schoolwork, alternating at each other's homes. Kaminari had asked why the focus on academics. Akatani bluntly responded that despite being a heroic school, it was still a school, so academic learning was still a must. Heroics was not all about fighting and weapons blazing, he added. Brains, strategy and learning from history were also important aspects not to be ignored. Plus, the purple-haired teen made it quite clear that he wasn't going to have his friend flunk his way through his time at UA and unable to graduate as a hero. Not on his watch. So the weekend was a busy one for the two friends. But their schedule was about to get even busier. School reopened with the new Monday. The routine to UA was no different, though Akatani heard commuters talking about the USJ incident and the statement released by the school. From what he gathered, there was concern about how villains were able to infiltrate UA's security, but there was also boundless relief that none of the students were seriously injured. Meeting Kaminari at the station, there was relief shared between the two friends to see that there was no media frenzy waiting for them outside the gates this time round, allowing them safe, uninterrupted passage to class. Entering the room and reaching their desks, Kaminari turned to Akatani, say, since Aizawa-sensei got messed up pretty bad, who do you think is gonna replace him? Akatani glanced to the side. Kirishima was holding a mostly one-sided conversation with Bakugo. Who knows? But things wouldn't have gotten so complicated in the first place if it weren't for a certain explosive son of a bitch and his masochistic red-headed friend. He replied a bit louder than necessary. Bakugo whirled around so fast he almost got whiplash. The fuck did you say? Akatani turned to the snarling blonde, undeterred. If you and Kirishima hadn't gone all Leroy Jenkins on Kurogiri at USJ, things wouldn't have descended into hell in the first place. Maybe, just maybe, Aizawa-sensei wouldn't have been severely injured then. Bakugo was ready to lunge for Akatani, only held back by Kirishima. I know, I'm sorry. It was so not manly of us, the redhead apologized. Come on Bakubro, apologize too. Fuck no. I didn't do shit. Bakugo flicked the bird at Akatani. The purple-haired teen rolled his eyes. Oh don't worry, you're excused Bakaho. It's clear that your overinflated ego and inferiority complex prevents you from understanding when you're in the wrong, and having even the slightest sliver of basic decency needed to pull off something as difficult as an apology. So yeah, you can go back to being the piece of dogshit you are and spare us the agony of having to deal with your general nastiness. All conversation around them stopped. The latest roast has been dropped. Kaminari snorted, turning around. Yo Todoroki. Think you could come here and ice the Pomeranian? That burn was intense. Smatterings of laughter followed the electric blonde's jibe. Bakugo's temper, on the other hand, went through the roof. Breaking out of Kirishima's grasp with an explosion to the face, he lunged for Akatani, screaming with palms exploding, "You have a fucking death wish, arsehole? I will fucking kill you, you goddamn son of a dash." There was a whoosh. To Akatani's surprise, he recognized that familiar capture weapon wrapped tightly around Bakugo. His eyes led the others to the door. Centering on what looked like an ancient Egyptian mummy with their teacher's messy hair and clothes, one arm in a sling. Silence reigned for a moment, broken by Ida sputtering, Aizawa-sensei. Loud sigh escaped from the mummified figure. Just got out of the hospital, and I already have to deal with the explosive problem child. I feel like this is some overused story trope, which I'm not being paid enough to endure. The eternally exhausted man unceremoniously dropped Bakugo to the floor. The barrage of noise came immediately after. Aizawa-sensei. Shouldn't you be resting? Are you really able to continue teaching? You shouldn't force yourself like this, Aizawa-sensei. The mummified teacher raised his free, bandaged hand for silence. Just because I look like some dry, desiccated corpse, does not mean that I am going to shirk my duties as a teacher. If I am able to do so, I will continue. Akatani raised his hand. Yes? Aizawa-sensei, can you actually see underneath all those bandages? Not important, Akatani-kun, Aizawa replied after a moment of silence. As I was saying, and as part of my duties as a teacher, today I'm here to inform you that USJ is just the beginning. Everyone, including Akatani, tensed. Your journey to become full-fledged heroes will be filled with unexpected curveballs, vast unknowns, and danger. What happened at USJ is a prime example of that. When things can go downhill quickly, and you don't know what is going to happen next. Akatani wondered where Aizawa was going with this. 2 weeks from now, you'll be facing yet another challenge in your journey. The class held their breaths, the tension rising exponentially. Namely, the sports festival. Akatani immediately puts the pieces together. His eyes widened. The sports festival, Karo? Azui asked. It's the greatest annual event organized by UA, overshadowing the Olympics in terms of scale and spectacle, Akatani explained. Us students will be given the chance to show off our very best to the whole of Japan, if not the entire world. Wave of surprise and awe spread through the entire class. Furthermore, Yayorozu added, the pro heroes will be watching. There's a chance of getting scouted by them if we impress them with our performance. The level of excitement just went up by several notches. What both your class representatives said, Aizawa affirmed, this is your single greatest chance of scoring an important boost in recognition and acclaim that could jumpstart your career as a pro hero. Take this chance seriously, for they don't come often. Your very future could depend on this. Akatani could tell his classmates were planning to do just that. Right, for homeroom, you have 15 minutes to do whatever the hell you want, just keep the noise down. Oh, Akatani-kun, I need to speak with you outside. Momentarily taken aback at being singled out, the vice president of 1A nodded. As his classmates turned to one another in conversation, he got up from his seat and followed the mummified teacher out the door. Closing it behind him, Akatani turned to Aizawa expectantly. Akatani-kun, I honestly don't know whether to thank you or throttle you for what you did last Thursday. The student guessed where this was going, but played innocent anyway. What do you mean, Aizawa-sensei? You ignored my orders to escape by getting involved with the fight against the Numu in Shigaraki. You could have died. Are you aware of the repercussions that will arise from such a scenario? Akatani stayed firm. I am aware of what would have happened if I had died that day. But I don't regret intervening in that fight. That is the thing, Aizawa retorted, you shouldn't have gotten involved. As your teacher, I am supposed to look out for your well-being and safety, even if I must put my life on the line. Said student crossed his arms over his chest. Listen, Aizawa-sensei, I don't doubt for a second your capabilities as a teacher and pro-hero. But with all due respect, you look like you needed help then. Aizawa wanted to speak, but Akatani interrupted. I can't imagine how painful it was to have your elbow partially disintegrated and your bones nearly ground into powder. You were in no good condition to keep fighting in such a state. Let's face it, if I hadn't intervened, you would have died pretty soon after. And before you go about questioning my capabilities, let me reiterate what I told you during the quirk test on the first day of school. I am fully aware of my abilities and limitations, you on the other hand, are not. If I am unable to help, I would have escaped. But I could fight back, so I did. Furthermore, if I hadn't intervened when I was able to, and you died as a result, I won't be able to forgive myself or live with the guilt for the rest of my life. Beneath the bandages, Aizawa was stunned by his otherwise cold-hearted, deadpan student's impassioned speech. Plus, Akatani's argument was solid, nowhere could he refute what was said. The mummified teacher sighed, knowing he won't be getting anywhere with Akatani. Just don't do something as reckless as you did again. Said student replied, I hear you loud and clear, Aizawa-sensei, but I can't promise you that. Sometimes, being reckless means a life is saved. And that's what true heroes do. With that, Akatani bowed. Turning on his heel, he slid the door open and took a step back towards the room. Suddenly stopping, he turned back to Aizawa. By the way, you might want to consider making some eye holes in your bandages so you can see. The mummified teacher stayed still for a moment longer, as Akatani slipped back into class. Sighing loudly, he too re-entered the room, wondering how he was going to deal with two problem children in his class. The general excitement simmered through the rest of homeroom and Cementos class, but things really came to a head after the bell for lunch rang across the school. The sports festival. Kirishima hooped, I am so pumped for this. This is gonna be so much fun. Ashido cheers alongside the redhead, I can't wait. Meanwhile, Akatani was chatting with Kaminari on other matters that were of a more immediate need for addressing. What do you think's on the menu today? Asked the blonde. I'm not too sure. Akatani got up from his seat, hopefully katsudon, it's been a while since I had one. At the other side of the room, Uraraka and Ida were just about to depart from the classroom for the cafeteria. The brunette pulled the door open, only to be startled by what was waiting for them outside. What is this? Eyes were turned towards the scene. A crowd of students blocked the doorway, spilling into the corridor outside. Excuse me. Ida piped up, chopping a hand in the air. What is the purpose of you lot blocking our way to lunch? Obviously to scout out the competition, fucking Four Eyes, Bakugo drawled, pushing his way past an indignant Ida. The explosive blonde stomped up to the gawking students, staring them down with a look of pure condescension. Move it, fucking bugs. Wave of disbelief swept the students crowding outside the door. Ida went completely ballistic, berating Bakugo for demeaning their fellow schoolmates whilst chopping the air furiously with his hands. Akatani sighed, moving away from his desk to begin the process of damage control. At the same time, there was a disturbance in the crowd. So this is what we're greeted with when scoping out the students of 1A. Akatani, who had come up silently behind Bakugo, peeked around the blonde's shoulder. Another male student, whose lighter shade of purple hair seemed to be defying gravity and had eye bags which signified a prolonged period without sleep, nudged his way to the front of the crowd. "You're really cocky and arrogant, aren't you?" The presumably insomniac student clicked his tongue. "Are all the students in 1A as despicable as you are?" Bakugo glared at the insult, while Ida and Uraraka shook their heads and hands rapidly in response to the question. "You wanna fucking die, you dash." Whatever the explosive blonde tried to say ended abruptly as his body seized up rather comically. The insomniac student and others like him watched with raised eyebrows as green electric bolts crackled all over Bakugo's body, before disappearing as fast as they came. Bakugo crumpled to the floor, lifeless, hair smoldering. You have to excuse Bakugo, his brain cells are dedicated to explosions and being a right dish a bag, not towards being a decent human being. All eyes turned from the unconscious blonde to the deadpan Akatani, fingers crackling with electricity. "Who are you?" someone from the crowd asked. "I am Akatani Makumo, Vice Class President of 1A, Akatani replied, lowering his hand. "I'd apologize for Bakugo's abhorrent behavior, but honestly, he ain't worth it." The insomniac scrutinized him amidst the amazed whispers. "You appear to be a capable person, so I'll get straight to the point on this. I am here with a declaration of war." Akatani remained unfazed, even as the rest of his classmates stiffened behind him. "What brought this up?" "The sports festival is the ticket," the insomniac explained. "Students from the other courses are granted a place in the heroics course when they do well in the festival. Furthermore..." Tired, yet fierce eyes connected with deadpan ones. "I intend to be one of those students who will get into the heroics course." Akatani nodded. "A truly admirable goal, one I can respect you for. And you're more than welcome. You're way more desirable as a student of 1A than some I had the unfortunate luck to meet. Namely Bakugo," he pointed at the still smoldering blonde, "and Mineta, then at the grape-headed pervert, who was in the midst of getting smacked by Ajui's tongue." He continued, "But that's not to say that we're just going to be mere pushovers. We are 1A for a reason. We will fight our hardest to come out the very best. So on behalf of my class, I will accept your declaration of war, and return that declaration with full force." Silence followed Akatani's speech. The insomniac smirked. "I think I'm going to enjoy this," he said. "I expect a good fight on the battlefield, to prove you lot aren't just a bunch of arrogant brats. Until then." With a wave, the purple-haired insomniac turned around, nudging his way into the crowd. Akatani released a breath, turning back into the room. "Let's go, Kaminari. All this oratory is making me hungry." Coming." As his friend caught up, Akatani turned to the crowd. "Please excuse us, we need to cut through. Lunch takes priority over fame and glory."
That's it for today. Remember to show your support to the creator of this story if you enjoyed it. If you would like more parts of the story to be uploaded, leave a comment and subscribe to get notified when the story continues. Bye-bye for now, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.